Hey everybody, Nick Espinosa, your chief security fanatic here. Don't forget to subscribe. And today is Sunday, so we are doing breaches of the week. Oh, and this week in data breaches, absolutely insane. And before we dive in, I'd like to thank Thomas Garrity, Mike Pengotti, Nimesh Patel, and Francois Monroe for sending me a lot of this information. Please keep sending those tips my way. And this week has so many ongoing data breaches, updates, and probably one of the most unusual and strange things that I've seen in the years I've been doing data breaches, and that is actions by the Federal Trade Commission. And we're going to dive into that. You don't want to miss that. And with that, let's start though with BRG, or the Berkeley Research Group, because they identified a breach on March 2nd and basically said they received several ransomware notices. Now, the attackers claim they have stolen data within BRG's systems and encrypted files. That's pretty standard, but here's the thing, and this is why it's interesting. BRG is actually in the process of selling a majority equity stake of itself to Towerbrook Capital Partners. That acquisition is being financed with a $700 million leveraged loan by Royal Bank of Canada, basically along with other banks as well. That's expected to close in April. And the reason why I started with this is when you see data breaches like this happen, these screw up sales, they screw up mergers, they screw up acquisitions, because now basically the parties involved say, hey, wait a second, BRG, you just got data breach, which means your valuation is probably lower. We don't want to pay $700 million for you, which means BRG could lose a significant amount of money. That's a huge, huge problem. They just spent money on cybersecurity. They wouldn't be potentially losing a whole bunch of money in the sale, and it would have been a lot cheaper, which leads us to our mini segment. If you just spent money on cybersecurity, you wouldn't be getting data breached, you wouldn't be getting fined, you wouldn't be losing your reputation, and you sure as heck wouldn't be talked about on this show. And with that, let's start with MGM Resorts International. They finally reached a settlement over two breaches that affected 37 million people in July of 2019 and also in September of 2023. They are preparing to pay a $45 million settlement, basically to millions of customers by those two massive breaches. And we'll actually be talking about MGM in a bit here because you're going to want to hear that one. It's absolutely nuts. Now, with that, Columbia Regional Healthcare, they've agreed to $1.17 million worth of a settlement, basically after an investigation on December 28 concluded that they had a breach between May 19th through the 21st of 2023. If you were impacted by this, you can receive up to $5,000 of unreimbursed documented out-of-pocket expenses. Most people are going to get about $50 out of this, and you've got until April 2nd to submit your claim for Columbus Regional Healthcare System. Moving on, Allstate, yes, the giant insurer, New York State, basically is accusing Allstate of failing to report a data breach that exposed driver's license numbers and lacking reasonable safeguards to protect private data of their information. So the lawsuit was filed by New York Attorney General Letitia James, who quite frankly is doing the cyber lord's work, as I see her constantly going after corporations for this. And here we are. They are looking to have civil fines up to $5,000 per violation, plus other remedies, meaning if you really got your identity stolen, you're actually going to get a little bit of recourse here. So good luck to you, Allstate customers. Moving on. Change Healthcare. This is one of the big ones. Essentially, the fallout from their massive February 2024 cyber attack. And remember, they impacted 1/3 of all U.S. pharmacy patients in the world. And this is still going on. I'm sorry, in the United States. And this is still going on. So now, Care First Blue Cross Blue Shield of Maryland is the latest company to sue over this breach. And the lawsuit filed, obviously, in Maryland State Court late February alleges that United Healthcare Group's subsidiary, Change Healthcare, basically had lacking and insufficient cybersecurity controls for obvious reasons. So heads up to you if you use the Blue Cross Blue Shield in Maryland. Moving on. Let's go to the Ninth Circuit Court, federal court, because they just upheld a conviction of the ex-Uber security chief in a data breach cover-up. I've actually covered this, and this is actually one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of Uber. So, with that, a Ninth Circuit panel this past Tuesday upheld the conviction of Joseph Sullivan, not a stranger to me talking about him. Basically, he's the former chief security officer over at Uber. and they upheld the conviction on federal obstruction of justice and other charges after he covered up the 2016 data breach while he was at the company. If you remember, they had basically 57 million app users hit with credit card basically information getting dumped, names, phone numbers, email addresses, driver's license, all of that kind of stuff. It was a huge thing, and a jury convicted Sullivan in 2022 of obstruction of justice and was sentenced to 3 years probation in order to pay $500,000 in fine. Sullivan then appealed, and his attorneys argued for a new trial, saying that the jury was not given proper instructions. But a senior U.S. Circuit Court judge, Mary McKeon, who basically was appointed by President Clinton back in the day, wrote in the panel's 20-page ruling this past Thursday that a reasonable jury could find that Sullivan knew the conduct he was engaging in was a felony. Now, that said, I also think that they should have held Uber's higher-ups, like the CEO, accountable as well, because that was a very toxic environment back then they've been trying to clean up. But for that reason, and for them covering that up, I'm not a big Uber fan, and I typically don't use Uber for anything. Moving on. Stanley Steamer, they just agreed to a $700,000 class action lawsuit settled to resolve claims that they failed to prevent a 2023 data breach that compromised employee and customer information. Basically, out-of-pocket expenses have a $10,000 cap if you've got extraordinary, my identity was stolen, and alternatively, class members can receive a cash payment capped at $100 for employees, $50 for customers, and you got until April 28th to go get your Stanley Steamer money. Moving on, PowerSchool. Yes, the massive breach that continues to unfold because now the St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin school district has filed a federal lawsuit against PowerSchool, kicking into motion basically a campaign to hold PowerSchool accountable for what could be and most likely is the largest data breach of students in history. 30 plus separate class action lawsuits charged by negligence could soon be basically merged into one utterly unbelievably massive class action lawsuit. And so stick around because we have even more Power News School for you. It's absolutely nuts. Moving on, the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority, or RIPTA. If you're a longtime listener of Breaches of the Week, you know I've been talking about them for a while now, but the ACLU, our American Civil Liberties Union of Rhode Island, announced this past Monday that a proposed settlement has been filed in the class action lawsuit against RIPTA and also United Healthcare of New England. Everything's linked right over an August 2021 data breach at RIPTA that compromised social security numbers and other personal information, basically of thousands of individuals. So RIPTA and UHC will establish a $350,000 settlement fund with a possible addition of $25,000 more if claims exceed that amount as financial compensation to those class members who submit claims, and here we are. So you can get up to $1,000, again, basically extraordinary circumstances, or you can get $15 an hour and $7,500 for extremely extraordinary circumstances, and we'll see what happens. But heads up to you there, and that was your mini segment. If any of them had just been spending on cybersecurity, they wouldn't have their reputations ruined, they wouldn't be getting sued, and they sure as heck wouldn't be paying out like this, and I definitely wouldn't be talking about them. Now, back into real time. Let's talk about Cardi's Furniture, Cardi's Department Store, Inc., aka Cardi's Furniture and Mattress. They filed with Massachusetts after basically somebody got in and got access to sensitive information, and we're talking names, social security, financial account information, driver's license numbers, and Cardi is sending out notifications. Moving on. The Fall Mountain Regional School District, an employee of Fall Mountain, released, and this is in New Hampshire for the record, released names, addresses, and tax IDs or social security numbers for 623 district vendors in a data breach caused by a phishing scheme. He provided this information via a spreadsheet. I'm going to go ahead and assume it was Excel. Moving on. The Holt Group, on March 11th, they filed with Texas after discovering an unauthorized party got into their information, and we are talking names, financial account information, driver's license numbers, and addresses impacted. Holt Group is sending out letters. Moving on. Rivers Casino, Philadelphia. Several Pittsburghers, and I guess that's what you'd call a person from Pittsburgh, that's news to me, say that basically they have received letters notifying them of a breach in the Rivers Casino, Philadelphia. Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, obviously two different cities, but this news is clearly coming from local Pittsburgh news. Now, multiple people who have shared letters with Action News 4 in Pittsburgh also said that they've never visited the casino. So what's going on here, right? And according to the letter on February 16th, the casino identified files that were breached that may have contained people's dates of birth, social security numbers, and driver's license number. This is unusual. I'm going to keep you informed, but people in Pittsburgh saying, I've never been to Philadelphia at Rivers Casino are getting letters. That's an interesting one. Moving on, Baylor, Scott, and White Texas Spine and Joint Hospital, that's a mouthful, announced that they have a data breach that may have affected patient information. Somebody got into Office 365 and was able to access email between January 10th through the 14th of this year. Full name, date of birth, address, medical or treatment information, billing, and claims information was impacted, and I promise you they're sending letters as well. Moving on. United Faith Ministries on March 11th, they filed with the General Attorney General of Texas after discovering an unauthorized party got into their information, and we are talking names, address, health insurance information, and dates of birth. United Faith Ministries is sending out notices. New Motion learned that somebody accessed a certain employee email account or accounts without authorization between September 2nd through November 18th of 2024. We're talking names, social security, dates of birth, financial information, medical information, health insurance information, driver's license information, address, and product information as well. Moving on. The St. Clair Orthopedics and Sports Medicine on November 24th, they became aware somebody was in their network, and on December 9, the investigation determined that they had locations that were impacted. And we're talking name, social security number, driver's license number, other identifying numbers, and health insurance data, health data in general, test results, images, care treatment, billing, insurance claims, payment data. Basically, if you looked at St. Clair Orthopedics and Sport Medicine the wrong way, they've got your info. So heads up to you. Moving on, PowerSchool update number 2 out of 3. That's right. PowerSchool is all in the news this week for me. So with that, this is the latest school to declare, and that would be the Lower Kuskokwim School District, or LKSD. So if you live in Lower Kuskokwim, heads up to you. That's a mouthful too. Moving on. Here we go. Best Collateral on March 6th. They followed California after somebody got into their network. And we are talking names, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, biometric information, military ID numbers, and health insurance policy information as well. Best Collateral is sending out notices. Moving on, Freddie Mac, the giant federal lender, on November 4th, they became aware of a security incident in their internal systems. A unauthorized third party gained access to files and folders containing confidential information, and all I know right now is names and social security numbers and more were hit. Freddie Mac is huge, so I'm going to be keeping an eye on this. And if you've taken out a loan on Freddie Mac, which I think is the student loan one, not the mortgage one, because there's also Fannie, I'm not sure which it is. Nevertheless, Freddie Mac, heads up to you, customers, employees, etc., etc. With that, let's go to our finalies. And I want to do this finally in the most non-political way possible because, quite frankly, this is unusual. And it is unusual because we're going to be talking about MGM, again, Resorts International. I talked about them in the lawsuit section of my website, or the mini segment, rather, the website, the mini segment of this. But I need to talk about them in regards to the Trump administration. Now, again, I have a saying that it basically says cybersecurity is agnostic to politics, but we're not immune from it. And I think this is one of those things. And if you are a longtime listener, you know I have literally been doing breaches of the week for years and years and years, 5+ years at this point, meaning multiple presidencies, Trump 1.0, Biden, now Trump 2.0, and all of that. I'm just calling balls and strikes because we have to talk about the Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, because they just shuttered their case against MGM Resorts International, centered on the company's handling of basically the personal data, stolen during that 2023 ransomware attack. Now, the FTC filed a civil investigative demand in January of 2024, seeking answers to dozens of questions about the ransomware attack that involved customer and employee data, as well as troves of business information. Now remember, January 2024, President Biden was still in office. Now the FTC specifically wanted information on the company's compliance with Section 5 of the FTC Act, the safeguard rule under GLBA, that's the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, and the red flags rule under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. This is all, for the record, standard. I read things like FTC reports, SEC 8K and 10K filings, not just like in my day job, but for breaches of the week as well. I get sources from everywhere on these breaches from around the world, and so this is really kind of near and dear to me. Now, MGM Resorts International repeatedly, after that January 2024 request, repeatedly refused to provide information, and the FTC never likes that. So the FTC in June filed a lawsuit in Nevada to enforce essentially their laws. Now, the two sides went back and forth in court for months, with the casino giant demanding, interestingly enough, that the head of FTC, the chair, Lena Khan, who is obviously no longer the chair, basically recuse herself because she happened to be staying at a Las Vegas hotel owned by MGM at the time of the cyber attack. Meaning, as the cyber attack was going on, Lena Khan was, I don't know, getting her hotel suite on, whatever it was, right? So the company also petitioned to have the case moved to Washington, D.C., and question whether the FTC actually had jurisdiction in the case at all. And hint, hint, they're publicly traded, so they do. So basically, on February 28th of this year, though, now again, we are now in President Trump, or Trump 2.0, basically court filings confirmed that with the Trump administration taking office, the FTC's CID had been withdrawn, making the court cases moot, according to lawyers for both sides. Document files in federal court in both Nevada and Washington, D.C. say that MGM was contacted by the FTC on January 26th of this year, and basically to say that it intended to terminate litigation around the CID. And over the past week or so, the two sides have filed motions to dismiss many of the cases against MGM. So I found this odd because the FTC's enforcement wing for data breaches, and usually, they're pretty thorough. And these cases, for the record, are not really dropped like this, especially when the defendant has been stonewalling the government. That is very unusual. The government basically is not a fan of having an MGM of the world tell them to go pound sand, and drag it out in court. And so their enforcement wing is oftentimes very long, very accurate, and very thorough. And so by virtue of that, I searched years, literally years of my notes on breaches like I do, and I could not find another case involving the FTC, SEC, or any of the other enforcement wings, in the federal government for a case like this where it was unceremoniously dropped, especially when there's pending litigation, and especially when essentially the defendant, like an MGM, was essentially stonewalling the government. So I did some digging. And I went to Open Secrets, and if you're not familiar with Open Secrets, they basically take all of the donor data of who basically donates to what political campaign or candidate or super PAC or whatever, and I started looking around. And so by virtue of that, I started with MGM Resorts International for the 2024 election cycle. Obviously, it's President Biden and eventually Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. We all know how that ended. So the election, basically, in this case, the election cycle that MGM donated to in 2024 was actually fairly evenly split between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. In fact, MGM donated slightly more to Kamala Harris than Donald Trump. Now, that's a common tactic that corporations do. You hedge your bets when you're large, right? Because who knows who's going to win the election? Is it Harris? Is it Trump? We're going to basically play nice with both sides because we've got a business to run and we want to play nice with the government. So, by virtue of that, that's kind of a dead end. But I then went looking at the current CEO of MGM Resorts International, William J. Hornbuckle, or Bill Hornbuckle, and here's where it gets interesting. Now, financial disclosures show that for years, Mr. Hornbuckle has been donating to Donald Trump. And so by virtue of that, 538, basically the statistics blog that was eventually purchased, I believe, by ABC, had an article on this, and I quote, 13 owners have contributed directly to Trump's campaign or Trump's super PAC in the 2020 election cycle, with contributions adding up to 1,746,423 donors, and the list of owners includes Hornbuckle, who was then the owner of the Las Vegas Aces. And beyond that, he's continued to donate and on and on. So what we have is a pattern of essentially a wealthy CEO donating to a political campaign, and all of a sudden the company that he's running that is going through litigation with the FTC has their case killed. And I think that's interesting. And so my question is this pay to play? I don't know. I honestly can't say that because I'm not an attorney, but it seems on its face like there could be a case for that. And I think it's something we need to keep our eye on with this. Now, if I see more corporations with massive breaches getting passes from the FTC in litigation, I think I might actually start a new segment on this because, quite frankly, that's not good. And conversely, on the other side, you've got people like New York Attorney General Letitia James, who basically makes a sport out of suing everybody for data breaches, basically to protect consumers. So I'm going to see where this goes. Again, I'm not blaming or accusing the FTC or President Trump or even Bill Hornbuckle, CEO of MGM, former Las Vegas Aces owner. I'm not accusing them of anything. I just find it incredibly odd. And as somebody that tracks data breaches week over week, year over year, and if you're, again, a longtime listener and follower, I do that. This is the first time I've ever seen that. And so I think it's weird and I think it needs examination. And so I'm going to keep on it. I will. And with that, we've got one more finally for you, and that would be PowerSchool again, because it just keeps getting worse with these people. And it's bad enough that they got about 60 million American and Canadian students doxxed. But here we go, because basically PowerSchool just published the long-awaited investigation report by CrowdStrike into their 2024 data breach. That was December of 2024 for the record, and they basically determined that the company was previously hacked 4 months earlier in August, and then again in September. So essentially, we have months, literally months, of PowerSchool being insecure and not knowing it. Now, in that report, CrowdStrike confirmed that the threat actors breached PowerSchool through PowerSource using compromised credentials and maintained their access between December 19th through December 28th of 2024. That was the one that basically splashed out everything. The cybersecurity firm also confirmed that the threat actor exfiltrated teachers' and students' data through these compromised systems, though it notes that no evidence that other databases were stolen. In other words, the information on teachers and students were essentially taken. Anybody else relating to PowerSchool, like if you're there as a janitor or something, you weren't hit. Now, similarly, there is no evidence that malware was planted on PowerSchool systems or that the threat actors escalated their privilege or moved laterally or downstream to customer or school systems. In other words, all of these school districts that were impacted were not basically attacked by the attackers. They hit PowerSchool, they exfiltrated databases for teachers and students, and that was it. No remnants of malware or anything else. And there is actually a silver lining, at least as of January 2nd, because CrowdStrike noted that as of that date, its dark web intelligence showed that the threat actors have kept their promise not to publish this data after the extortion demand was paid, and CrowdStrike has not found the data offered for sale or leaked online as a result of that. Now, that is, again, as of January 2nd. We'll see what happens in the future. Hopefully, they are maintaining that. But that is a huge, huge problem that we have, maintaining persistence in a network or understanding good, proper credential and password rotation with multi-factor authentication. If they were properly rotating their credentials, or they have privileged access management systems, or even possibly multi-factor authentication systems that were hardened in advance, like adaptive and contextual MFA, this wouldn't have happened. And so this really behooves us, and I think it really underscores to the world that the traditional MFAs, the traditional single factors of authentication, are simply not the way to go. And privileged access management, identity access management as well, not to mention things like cloud access security brokers, et cetera, are essentially the name of the game now, because it hardens perimeters around the users, it hardens perimeters around the data, and it simply hardens everything. And so make sure that you've got that. If you are just a standard non-corporate user, you're listening to this as simply a resident of a country somewhere, enable the best MFA you can with an authenticator app or a hardware token. Don't use SMS text messaging. Don't use email. If you have to have a backup authenticator in some way, shape, or form, but try not to do that. And even so, there are more advanced features out there from a lot of really good cybersecurity companies and platforms that are offering privileged access management, identity access management, cloud access security brokers, and more. So I leave it at that. It's been an absolutely crazy week. There's a lot to digest here. There's also a lot to keep an eye on. So I will, and keep tuning in. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please, please, please attempt to stay private. Thanks, everybody.